Well, welcome back, all you code monkeys out there. I'm going to talk to you about the fun you can have using absolute positioning. And so the idea here is that when you have a block level element, actually it doesn't even have to be block level element. If you have an element that's inside of a relatively positioned tag, like a div or something like that, the element that's inside, if you position it as absolute, you can do so many interesting things with it. It's really good for layouts, and it gets used heavily for drop-down menus and things. Plus, it's a great way to decorate. Now, I've started this code pen here, and I better name it. So, fun with absolute positioning, and I really do not like the default font. So we're going to do a quick change here. I went to Google Fonts. I'm going to add this particular font called Bitter. So let me just quick add that to my code pen. Stuff for the head. There's our link. And I don't need JavaScript for this tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and on the body, we're going to give it a font family of Bitter, comma, serif. I believe it's a serif font. It's a slab font, so I don't know if there's a default slab. So we just did a little simple stack. What we're going to do is we're going to create an outer div. In fact, let's give it a class of outer. And inside of our outer div, we're going to position several items using what's called absolute positioning. So let's go ahead and create the first one. And I'm going to give it a class of inner, but I'm going to give it another one, example-1, because I'd like to create several different examples in our code. And so I'm just going to put inside of here, I'm going to put a header 2, and I'll put example number 1, like so. Okay. So the trick to this is we're going to start with our outer div. We're going to go ahead and we're just going to tag anything with the class of outer. We're going to give it a position of relative. Now, there are many different position schemes. The default one is called static. What relative does is we're not going to see any major change with relative. It just means whatever we do is relative to the rest of the page. So this won't really change the behavior of the outer div. But before we go much further, I'm going to go ahead and style some more on the outers to give you some ideas here. We're going to go ahead and set the height. If you don't set the height, this will still work, but sometimes it's a good idea to set it. I'm going to set it at 200 pixels. We can't tell what the height is until we give it a background color, so we're going to go ahead and give it a background color. And I'm going to give it some form of gray. We'll try 888, like so. There we go. So example 1 is inside of the outer div. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and style inner. Well, I'm actually not going to style it. I'm just going to set that there to be used a little bit later. And I'm just going to, for example, -1, let's go ahead and set width and height. For now, we're just going to give it a width and height of 50%. Just completely arbitrary. I'm going to decide how I want to do this. I'm going to give it a background color, and this will help us see it better. Give it a greenish color. Green tends to go well with the gray background. Let me just try something here. Can't really see much of a difference between those colors. That's pretty good. All right, so anyway, let's do this. Okay, at this point, this is 50% width, 50% height. So it takes the upper left-hand quadrant of our outer div, but that's only because we had already set the height at 200 pixels. The width is going to be whatever the width of the screen is going to be. Okay. In fact, let me just resize this a little bit. So as we resize, we'll see because we did 50%, it still does the same amount. Okay, this is where the fun begins. Now, watch what happens when I take this inner div and I position it differently. I'm going to position this absolutely. And the header changed a little bit. Not much else changed on there. But what we're going to do is on example 1, now that we have a position of absolute, we can now move this in absolute position, and it will be actually relative to its outer container. What do I mean by that? Let's go to example 1. I'm going to put it right 0. Moves the whole thing to the right-hand side exactly. Okay. We can also set the bottom at 0, and it moves it down to the bottom. So we could give it, instead of right, we could give it left of 0. So left, right, bottom, top. Okay, so we can position it a lot of different ways. What if we want to position it just identically in the middle of everything? Okay, if we already know this is a 50% width, a 50% height, if we give it a left of 25%, now it's centered left to right. And if we give it a bottom of 25%, now it's vertically centered as well. This only really works, and it looks best when there's not content in the outer div. Right? And by setting the height, we can get that exactly where we want it. Now, if we had not set the height of our top div, watch what happens. Everything sort of collapses. And the reason why, there's no content in there. So if you don't set the height of the outer div, the only other way we can get a height in here is maybe if we're to put a header 2 in here. Like so. Now, look at what happens. So the background image of my absolutely positioned item is still centered, but the text is kind of broken that because this is a header 2, and this header 2 has a certain amount of style that sort of breaks it out of there. So you do have to be a little bit careful how you do this. Now I'm just going to go back a couple steps. It's up to you whether you want to leave that tag in there or not. I'm going to go back here and undo what I did there. Okay, so once you set the height, that's going to help. If you want to set the width, that will also change things. And see what it does? I had actually meant to make that 200 pixel width, like so. So, you know, it just depends on how the outer one is sampled. Now, there's more to this. I'm going to take the width out and go back to kind of where we were before. Now, we're not done because there's more we can do with this. Not only can we give it a left of 25% or a bottom of 25%, but we could give it a negative value. Watch what happens when I give it negative 25%. Now, it's actually extending below. Or if I want to give it a top of negative 25%, now look what it does. So we can give it negative values and move it outside of the containing block. And this can be really handy with decorative elements like images and things. But as you can see, we have a problem because now it's blocking our code over here. Well, there's one other element we can play around with this item here, and that's called the ZIndex. If we give the ZIndex a negative integer, that moves it behind everything else. But now, example number 1, we don't even see it as overlapping. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the outer, and we're going to give it an index position, or ZIndex, excuse me, of -2, thereby putting it further away. Now, the idea of ZIndex is you have X and Y coordinates, right? Like your standard geometry class. X refers to horizontal from left to right. Y refers to vertical, top to bottom. Well, Z is forward to back, and this is like laying down a bunch of cards, one on top of another. So the highest ZIndex element always displays over anything else. The lowest ZIndex element always displays behind. So by giving outer a z-index of -2, example 1 a z-index of -1, now example 1 is a little bit closer to the viewer than -2, but not as close as the default z-index, which just so happens to be either 0 or 1, not sure. Let's experiment. So in order to experiment with this, I've given the header 1 a background color. I'm going to give it all BBB. And so we got gray. And so we have a negative z-index of the example 1. If you look here, it has a z-index of 10. And so that's a higher number than my header 1, which has an z-index of -1. If I just change that to z-index to -2, suddenly the z-index of 10 now is appearing above it. So I've positioned it at relative, and for some reason it just didn't like the z-index of -1. But once I give a lower number, suddenly that goes below. And of course, if I just give it a value of 1, that goes above. So just understand it may have to do with the fact that the header 1 has a position of relative as opposed to some other like absolute positioning. Don't know exactly, but if things aren't working right, you just fiddle around with the numbers. Let's go back to what we were working on now. So at this point, I'm just going to get rid of that background color and go back to kind of where we were at before. All right, so do be aware there are some little differences here. Let me give you one other example here, and I'm going to move this left. I'm actually going to make it 0 on the right, just to sort of get it out of the way. I'm going to give it a top of 0 to. By the way, whenever you give a unit of measurement and the number happens to be 0, it is considered bad form to put a unit of measurement. It's best just to put 0. When it comes to z-index, it's always just an integer. There's no actual sizing here. It's just a number. All right, so now we've moved this over to the right. What I want to do is show you a little decorative item. What you can do is you can take an image. So I'm going to put an image inside of my div. This will be the last thing I do. Oops. All right, and I'm going to need to give it a class. We don't have an image yet. Oops. Okay, so I need to find an image, give it an alt attribute, give it a class, and we'll style it. I'm going to find a little decorative image I can use sort of to decorate the background here and show you how we can use position. So I did a little research and I found tribal pictures, cliparts.com. If you go to the page, it'll say right here, 50 images of tribal pictures. You can use these free clip arts for your documents websites. Don't forget to link to this page for attribution. cliparts.co/tribal pictures. There's your credits. All right, we find one of these graphics, and it doesn't matter which one. I'll do the one I was originally pointing at. I'm going to right-click on here, copy link address. And then I go back here on my image. I'm going to paste that in. Oh, it doesn't show me the picture. So let me go back a step and actually click on it. There's attribution. Image address. You switch that out. PNG. Wow, that's enormous. All right. One of the things is we're going to have to set the width and height there. I set the width at 50px. It is a square image, so that changes it right there. I'm just going to do upper decoration for a lack of a creative class. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to put right here. Oh, before I even do that, let me go back a step. Inner, we already gave it a position of absolute, so let's just go ahead and add that here. Upper decoration will also make that position absolute. And then after example 1, or I'll just do it right above, I'll put the upper decoration. And then I could put top negative, what was my height? I gave it 50 pixels, was it? Yeah, 50 pixels. So we'll do a top of negative 25 px. Moves it up to the top, left. I can do 50% like so. We need a Z-index. Give it a 100. That puts it on top. So then we can move it left or right or wherever we need to do on there. That's probably not exactly centered because I forgot to take into account the number of pixels. So maybe the better way to do it on here is set the width at a percentage. I don't know if that's going to work or not. 5%. Let's make it 4%. Left of 48. %. Because we've already set the width at 4%, 2% on each side of the midline, which would be 50%, take 2% off. The fact that you can see where example 1 lines up pretty much with the center of the graphic lets me know that that is probably centered horizontally left to right as well as vertically. Well, we can go ahead and put more images like that and other images to decorate our pages. Hopefully that gives you some ideas and you can use this for other examples. Before I go, let me just show you one of the common ways absolute positioning works on hover menus. So this is Century High School's website. You hover over a link and suddenly this menu appears down below. And then you go down, you hover, and there's another one over here. Well, what's happening is these are nested unordered lists. And in the outer unordered list is this nav bar across the top. That is positioned relatively. And then when you hover over a link, we tell the unordered list that's inside of that link to be visible, and we position it absolutely so that we can have it display wherever we want in relationship to the list item that is outside of it. As a demonstration, I'm going to type F12 to show you the developer tools on here. And one of the things I want to point out is that when you hover over, for example, activities, I'm just going to click up here. There's the list item. And inside of the UL, I'm going to click on the list item here, and I'm going to click over here and check active, which triggers the, like we're hovering over this. And so when you click on the unordered list inside and you look over, we can see the width was set here, 160 pixels. And you scroll down, visibility set to visible, but it's only on the hover. You'll see that right there, LI hover UL, position absolute. Now, when it's not being hovered, we have a left of negative 999 EM and a visibility of hidden. Yeah, but when you hover over it, we could now make it visible, and it is set as a position of absolute, which allows you to make that now appear where you want it to. So that's how that is done, and a very common use for the absolute positioning. Hopefully that helps explain it.